the documents are being misused, and the NRC knew for 6 months. So Friends of the Earth spent money on attorneys and experts, and we spent hours and hours preparing testimony when the NRC had the answers in their hand, answers that senators were asking for, and congressmen were asking for, representatives in California were asking for, the interveners wanted, and they knew it all was there, and they didn't give it forward. They purposefully chose to withhold it. And that shell game benefited who? It benefited Edison. And, there's all this discussion still going on that Edison can possibly restart. And yet there are many, many, many more documents that prove it's entirely not safe to restart. So where are we looking at the public good? Is that the public good for California and the people living and commuting near that plant? Or LA being the busiest port in the US and one of the busiest ports in the world? What does that mean for all of us? If the NRC, which is supposed to be the public's advocate, is instead playing sleight of hand and protecting a corporation.
And if we're going to talk about San Onofre, let's put the whole thing in perspective here. Here's how it started. It started when Southern California Edison decided that going through a proper vetting process was too much work and would take too much time. So they created a special contract with Mitsubishi, which restricted or set predetermined standings for the contract of how these steam generators were going to be created, which in turn led to the advanced degradation, despite the fact that at the time of installation, both Mitsubishi and Southern California Edison made multiple, quote, forward-looking statements about how long these steam generators would serve the people of California. Heck, they might even attempt to relicense these reactors because these steam generators were so good. Yet, not even outside of one full refueling cycle, we have seen the fact that both of them have been out of operation for a year because you cannot reverse this damage and you cannot stop this damage.
At a cost of $1 billion to the California ratepayers. They have lost $1 billion in this process.
How many megawatts of solar energy could we put in California for $1 billion? I'd love to have somebody tell me.
Yeah, now let's look at another case, though. Currently, Fairewinds is working on another case, and we're right in the middle of preparing our testimony and looking at data and answering questions from the attorneys for the interveners so that this can all be presented to the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, NRC again, for hearings. Now, going back 2.5 years, we were experts and brought forward a contention. And the contention is part of the process in which a group says that they have a problem with the process and they want the NRC to take another look. And our contention was accepted, finally. And that was 2.5 years later. Now we're finally looking at the additional evidence and bringing things forward.
I want to refer back to something that Maggie was talking about just a minute ago when she talked about who holds possession of the documents and how that can be used to prevent information from being released. Because this happened during the Fukushima response here in the United States. In the United States, all of our licensing stations were collecting data. They have ongoing radiological environmental analysis at each of these stations, and they were collecting information, data that showed that radiation from Fukushima was in fact traveling over the United States and being deposited on the ground with rain and any other type of deposition. But I have the emails which we'll be providing in links for this podcast where the NRC admits that they are not authorized to share the results of those measurements from, in particular, San Onofre and Diablo Canyon, specifically because of the fact that they do not belong to the NRC, they belong to the plant, and that because the NRC does not have those documents, they were not in a position to share them with the state or local counties. So this is just reaffirming the fact that there are multiple ways to get around this. And the question is enough pressure being put on to hold these officials accountable for the job that they have been appointed to do?
I agree with that. And here, in this case we're working on now, we brought these contentions forward. We're looking at the new data, and what they're calling proprietary is how a company that's trying to build a new nuclear plant prepared its quality assurance procedures and department. And did they adhere to the standards that are in the regulations? And they did not. We've already shown that. And now, as we go back to work on this case, we signed this non-disclosure, and they are calling everything that's new since the contention was filed and accepted, they're calling it all proprietary. That's unbelievable. The public has a right to know whether or not this utility, to which they are a ratepayer, is meeting critical standards of quality assurance for building and designing and fabricating and constructing a nuclear power plant. It's an outrageous abuse of power.
But it's not just about what information you're withholding. When you do release information, it's all about the messaging, the way that it's put in forward-looking statements. And another PDF which we're going to provide is from the California State Department of Health, where they are talking about how to take the data which showed the increased levels of radiation in California due to the Fukushima event, and how they squashed it effectively by adding in the levels of public health limits. And we have shared this data with a couple of different experts, and they have all replied back to us saying that if you're going to do this, in essence, if you're going to take a graph and squash it down to look like a line due to the public health limit that you're incorporating in there, then you use semi-log graphing. And any other type of display is an unethical approach for a public agency. But yet, that's exactly what they're doing. So it's not just what information are we withholding, but the messaging and the forward-looking twist that is put on all of this data, which to the casual observer gives you a misperception of reality.
So not only are they withholding the data for a number of reasons and using a number of methods, but when it does finally come out, it's sort of repackaged in a way that misleads the public.
Exactly.
All nice and neat with the wrapping and bow.
So we've talked about the industry and the nuclear corporations withholding data if they say it contains proprietary information. Another reason for withholding data is that it contains security information. Can you talk about that, Maggie?
I've seen very little information that's been withheld that contains actual security information. I think, again, that is a guise by the energy companies and by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to participate in facilitating these corporations keeping things under wrap. It says, this item is a security risk and therefore you cannot discuss it. That's not true in almost every case. And even when there are security risks, for example, guards who fell asleep at the Peach Bottom nuclear plant, or barriers to intake structures that aren't secure and there's a security risk. It's interveners who bring those risks forward to the NRC, and the NRC still has done nothing to correct these security risks, but they claim it can't be discussed because they are a security risk. So it becomes this vicious circle. And who's hidden the shell under the cover.
So, Maggie and Lucas, I presume that your quest for information and pressuring industry and the government to release more of it will continue.
Yes, definitely.
It is a never-ending struggle.
Well, Maggie, Lucas, thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you very much for having me, Kevin.
You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you for having us.